independence, love, social convention, gender roles, and religion. Charlotte Bronte's most famous novel challenges ideas on all these topics, and we are here to discuss it. I'm Charlene.
And I'm Mike.
And this is Jane Eyre Files. Chapter 22. A True Janian Reply. Hello, husband.
Bonjour, sa petite maman anglaise.
Ooh, your French is okay.
I went looking through all the old notes and all the old rundowns, and I know I did another French phrase, but it was just bonjour, mademoiselle.
Yes.
And so I was like, okay. Otherwise, I think I was going to call you an elf. I think that's what it was. She's referred to as an elf in this chapter.
Yes, Mr. Rochester is fond of thinking of her as a sprite.
Yes. This is a fun chapter. It's short, but packs a punch.
Yes, we are going back to Thornfield in this chapter.
We're going back to Thornfield. Thornfield. We're going back to Thornfield.
No.
I don't think so.
Oh, I don't know this reference.
Sorry? Okay, you don't listen to LL Cool J. It's fine.
No. I don't know. Let's see what the Venn diagram is of our listeners listening.
LL Cool J
yeah, and Jane Eyre
fans. I'm sure there is probably a fan group out there, LL Cool Jane Eyre. Somebody out there who loves going back to Cali.
Oh, if only LL Cool J would write a song about Jane Eyre.
Coming soon. All right, give us the Spark Notes summary for chapter 22, Charlene.
All right. Jane remains at Gateshead for a month because Georgiana dreads being left alone with Eliza, with whom she does not get along. Eventually, Georgiana goes to London to live with her uncle, and Eliza joins a convent in France. Jane tells us that Eliza eventually becomes the mother superior of her convent, while Georgiana marries a wealthy man. At Gateshead, Jane receives a letter from Mrs. Fairfax which says that Rochester's guests have departed and that Rochester has gone to London to buy a new carriage, a sure sign of his intention to marry Blanche. As Jane travels towards Thornfield, she anxiously anticipates seeing Rochester again, and yet she worries about what will become of her after his marriage. To her surprise, as she walks from the station at Millcote, Jane encounters Rochester. When he asks her why she has stayed away from Thornfield so long, she replies, still a bit bewildered, "I have been with my aunt, sir, who is dead." Rochester asks Jane whether she has heard about his new carriage, and he tells her, "You must see the carriage, Jane, and tell me if you don't think it will suit Mrs. Rochester exactly." After a few more words together, Jane surprises herself by expressing the happiness she feels in Rochester's presence. "I am strangely glad to get back again to you, and wherever you are is my home, my only home." Back at the manor, Mrs. Fairfax, Adele, and the servants greet Jane warmly.
I'm always confused about how much Spark Notes wants to give away and how deep they want to go into their summaries, because this is one of the shortest chapters in the book, 6 pages in my copy, and yet that was a pretty long description. They got into the minutia of the chapter.
With direct quotes from Jane, too. That's
exactly.
Well, that's fine, and it reminds us what's happening in this chapter.
Yeah. This chapter will be finally, I believe we are rid of all the Reed family.
Yeah. Jane kind of wraps up their storylines pretty quickly with just a few sentences. And, basically we're saying goodbye to Eliza and Georgiana. But they seem happy enough. They have got what they wanted. Eliza has a well-regulated and strict lifestyle as a nun. Like, who wouldn't want that?
Sure.
And then Georgiana marries someone wealthy and old, I guess. And that security that entails with a good marriage like that. So hopefully she is also happy and her husband dotes on her.
Yeah, I was thinking, like, isn't that kind of what Blanche
wants?
Was going for, or something like that?
That's true.
Because did they allude to the fact that he's old? It's just that he's wealthy, right?
Well, I think they said worn out gentleman, so who knows? Maybe
that's a way of saying old.
I would think so.
Okay, I'm a worn out gentleman, and I am not that old. But yeah, like I know we talked about it when we brought up Blanche's interest in Mr. Rochester, but is that something that was very common back then? Was I kind of like him, but he also takes care of me financially, or I have a comfortable lifestyle. Not like that happens in 21st century or anything, but especially more so back then.
Yeah, probably. When some women would prefer a man to just let them alone. So if you get an older man, they might not want to bother you too much. They just give you the money, your ornament on their arm, and they take care of your house, and that's fine. And we don't have to interact too much or something, which is maybe what Blanche wanted with Mr. Rochester too.
Okay. Yeah, and what's funny is, it mentions that Jane sticks around for a month just because the two sisters don't want to be alone together.
Oh, yeah.
But it's unfortunate because I feel like Jane is very kind and very helpful, and as a result, people tend to take advantage of her. Although she seems to be very passive aggressive with the Reed sisters. As far as I know, this is it's the only character I can think of that she wraps up their story she literally says, quote, "I shall not have occasion to mention them again."
Yeah.
Like to have this person's autobiography and be like, okay, I'm not going to talk about these people anymore. And then yet she still kind of, I think she goes into like another paragraph about them just to sort of wrap it up.
Oh, well, yeah. And like you said about her being taken advantage of, I feel that she's not really being taken advantage because she knows that they're using her, but she's just happy to help them out because she wants to get out of there quickly, I guess.
And how much time does she spend around women that are almost her age?
Oh, like her peers, maybe?
Yeah, right. I mean, other not counting Lowood, obviously, but now that she's in Thornfield, who else is there?
Maybe she likes to be away a little bit. She can clear her head about Rochester. She doesn't have to take care of Adele. She has to take care of some older childlike people, maybe.
Well, I wonder, and it makes me wonder if at some point they had a month. Does Eliza and Georgiana not ask her about, hey, is there a gentleman?
Oh, what are you doing?
And then she can say, oh, well, there is this guy, and he's my boss.
I don't think she'd say that.
No, she's
not going to be that close to them.
That wouldn't
reveal her feelings.
That wouldn't be very Janian of her.
No.
Charlotte Bronte has invented an adjective. So, yeah.
Yes. But I do like that there seems to be a grudging sort of respect between Jane and Eliza as, two independent women who rely on themselves, and they have a job to do and they get it done, and then they say goodbye.
Well, and I think I also noticed they both of them seem to find strength in religion, right?
Interesting.
I mean, obviously Eliza's going a little bit further, but Jane has always seemed to have profound faith. It's going to be even more stronger for the rest of the book.
Right.
But,
I guess if Mrs. Reed, you wouldn't think of her as necessarily very religious, especially as she kind of just turns to trying to expiate her sins at her deathbed and not enduring her life. And then Georgiana, she probably cares a lot of other things besides religion.
Yeah, that's what I thought was kind of funny, because in the previous chapter, it seemed like Georgiana was having more conversations with Jane, right? Like they could talk about kind of girl stuff, because she was like, I can't talk about this with Eliza.
Sure.
But yet in this chapter, it feels like Jane is closer to Eliza because they seem to have more of a common interest in their faith. Whereas I don't know if Jane relates to Georgiana.
No.
But it's what you can picture in your mind, like Georgiana just being like, oh my God, there's another woman here that I can talk to, and Jane just being like, okay, probably doesn't have a lot to add to it. She just listens.
I think Jane's a good listener, and she probably finds the stories that Georgiana tells her interesting, even if Georgiana might embellish things a little or something. But yeah, that's fine. That's fine for their relationship.
Yeah, we don't have to talk about them anymore.
Yes. So, reading this chapter, I feel like you said before that it's the shortest chapter so far, it feels like. But to me, it feels very portentous, like it's signaling that something important is coming. And I don't know if it's because I've read this book so much, and that's just the way that my mind is now thinking, like I know what's coming up next. But I do wonder if you felt that at all when reading this. Well,
that's one of those ones where I know where it's going.
You do.
I know.
Yes.
Yeah. Like when I was first reading it, I didn't necessarily draw off of that, but it's like a transitional chapter, right? Because this is where we're saying goodbye to the Reeds in a way, and yet going back to Thornfield. And I think it would have been just so abrupt if Mrs. Reed dies. The last line was no one shed a tear,
right,
or whatever, and all of a sudden it's like, okay, I'm back at Thornfield, where she wants to put some sort of like a gap, fill that gap without it being so abrupt.
That makes sense.
Like you talk about portentous, which is a word I've never even heard before, but I'll trust that you know what it means. I enjoy Shakespeare's plays, and I always talk about how Shakespeare's plays are always 5 acts, especially the dramas. That nothing ever happens in the 4th act. The 4th act is always usually the shortest act, and it's all just set up because everything breaks loose in the 5th act, right?
I see.
And so this kind of is a little bit similar. Well, but I mean, the 4th act in Jane Eyre probably doesn't. We're only halfway through the book, but
well, yeah, that's the interesting thing about Jane Eyre is I feel like there's like 2 climaxes in this book, like technically, which is kind of different for a novel. in the story structure, but
And
something else entirely.
Well, she got that from her sister, right? Isn't Wuthering Heights like 3 books in one? I felt like,
Oh,
or
wow.
maybe at least 2 books in one. When I read it, it was like, okay, like you said, right in the middle of the book, it just sort of ends and then it starts up again with it's like years have passed, right? Or something. So
that's true.
That came first, right?
Well, I guess technically Wuthering Heights was written first.
Was it written first? Okay. Anyway, so now we've got, like I said, it's a transitional phase where we're bridging the Reed family story and what?
The coming chapter, chapter 23, which if you know what's going to happen.
If you know, to all the Jane Eyre files out there.
Yes.
If you know, you know. But I was going to ask you, because it seems like every other transition between the phases of Jane's life is sort of a clean break, but yet Gateshead and the Reed family, they get like a quick little 1-chapter callback and a proper conclusion. Because it seems like when she leaves Lowood, boom, she's done. We're done with Lowood. When she leaves Gateshead the first time, she's off at Lowood.
Yeah.
Other than I think Bessie comes to visit her or whatever.
Yes.
But it seems like it's very clean delineation. This is the Gateshead life. This is the Lowood life, and now we're at the Thornfield section. And so I couldn't help but notice I thought it was kind of curious that all of a sudden there's this short little 6-page chapter where she sort of wraps up, okay, here's what happened to Eliza, here's what happened to Georgiana, rather than just being like, all right, I'm done, I'm back to Thornfield. Oh. And so I like that. It's nice to not have everything be a really long chapter because you've got to get so much into it. Whereas this one's like, it's just a nice little pleasant, there's very vivid. I love that word again because it always happens when I'm reading Jane Eyre. A very vivid description of Jane's journey back to Thornfield, where she's like 50 miles this day, another 50 miles, and I stayed in this town. And then the walk into Thornfield is even incredible. She's picking out the whole scenery, like she's setting the scene for just this random walk, and everything is going through her mind. And so I like it. I wish there were more chapters in this book that were like that, because obviously I like short chapters, especially if we're going to break them down 1 chapter at a time.
Yeah,
but yeah,
that transition chapter.
Yeah, you notice that everything else was just a total clean break. But
Yeah.
then this one's like, okay, let's have a little callback and just kind of wrap up what's going on with the Reed daughters. And
I guess there's also this transition, relating to Rochester and her future at Thornfield, because we end with the idea, Mr. Rochester's going to marry Blanche, and we know that's not going to happen. So how do we kind of get to that? How do we kind of get to that point where you can kind of tell what Rochester is thinking, so that it's not too jarring when we get to that point? And that's what the second half of this chapter does, is kind of set that up with Jane coming back for a month-long absence from Thornfield, and now she's returning home, and she's a little bit bittersweet because she doesn't know what's going to happen, but she's happy to see Rochester.
Yeah.
And, it did make me think about my recollections of like a homecoming, because she says, Jane says in this chapter, how people feel when they're returning home from an absence, long or short, I did not know. Which, for me, I don't have that many instances in my life of like coming home from somewhere long, being somewhere long term and then being so happy to come back, like so relieved. But
not even in college, maybe.
I don't know. I just didn't feel that
coming home after a semester or something.
I guess I didn't feel that disconnected because it was not. I was like a plane flight away. Kept in touch with my family. It just didn't seem that momentous, I guess. This absence.
Yeah, I think maybe that's just the age gap between us, because I remember the first semester that I went off to college, and I've made this joke before. I turned 21 my first semester off in college. So I wasn't like partying all the time, but I had gone to the bars, and when I came home, that was the first time I'd ever been away from my family for that long. This is before cell phones.
Yes.
Right? That's true. And my parents didn't have email, so it was more just calling on landline if it came to it. And then when I came home for Thanksgiving, the very first year, when I was 21, I walked into my grandmother's house and my uncle offered me a glass of wine. And it was the weirdest thing. I was like, oh, okay. And I didn't like it at all.
Yeah.
Usually I don't think anybody likes their first taste of wine.
Or alcohol.
It was just like, give me the sparkling grape juice instead. But I know you were asking about like how many different moments have we had like that where this is like a homecoming. And I thought of a couple, and I remember, I'm not going to go chronological, I'll just go with the most meaningful. I think we probably mentioned it on the show at some point, or maybe we haven't, but Charlene and I were incredibly inseparable when we first got together. People made jokes about us being joined at the hip and stuff like that. And the first month of our relationship, we were together every weekend, pretty much every Friday, Saturday, Sunday of every weekend. But before you and I had met, you had booked a 3-week vacation in England.
Yes.
Which you were going on by yourself.
Yes. I was meeting up with a friend there.
Yeah. And so the last night, I think it was either a night or two before your trip, you and I went back to the site of our first date, and we had a nice night, went out to dinner and kind of walked around, and we, you know, I was like, oh my God, I'm really going to miss you, because it had been such a whirlwind for that first month. And so while you were in England, we did talk. You wrote me sent me a postcard. We talked, you know, FaceTimed a couple of times.
Yeah, it was sometimes iffy internet connection, unfortunately.
But I've always told people in our group of friends that when you came home, that's still one of the most memorable days to me, because you had, I think it was, I only had a half day at work. I think it was Memorial Day weekend. I think it was the Friday of Memorial Day weekend or something. And you came, holiday, you had the whole day off. You came up to my work, had lunch with me at my office. I introduced you to my coworkers. Then you went to the movies, or you went to the mall or something.
Yeah, to kill some time.
To kill time until I could get off work. And then you brought me home. And then I remember we just took a nap.
Yeah.
And it was just, I just wanted to have you around me. And so that was sort of I mean, it wasn't me coming home, but it was sort of like you coming back to me. I totally
agree. Like, you know, similar to Jane coming home to Rochester, I guess it is sort of that romantic love, where it was the same for me, where I was just so happy to finally see you again and be with you after, you know, quite a long trip through. You know, I don't know. I usually like to do long trips to England, and I regretted it that one time.
I'm sure people over there were asking you about me and all that stuff.
Oh, yeah, I was telling people about
and then a month later, I was the best man in a wedding. And I didn't want to bring you because it was still too new, and I thought it would have been kind of weird.
Yeah.
And so when I got there, everyone was asking me, "Oh, where's this woman? Why aren't you?" And I was like, "No, it's fine." But I remember walking around that wedding just thinking, this is probably the last time I'm going to be at a wedding by myself.
Oh,
you know what I mean? And so it was like, it was a little bittersweet because there was a lot of couples there, and then when I flew home, it was just kind of like, I was obviously really happy to see you as well. But to bring it back to Jane Eyre, I don't know. I find it absolutely fascinating that, you know, it's such a bittersweet moment. It's a very tough predicament that she's in, because I feel like there's this unexpected sense of dread during the return. You know, and I know I've mentioned this on the show. One of my favorite sayings that you can always attribute to me is that I feel like you should always have something to look forward to.
Yes.
You know, and in the book, Jane says, quote, "I left reminiscence for anticipation." Like, she was so looking forward to this. But later on, I think it's the night before she gets to Thornfield, she says, "I that evening shut my eyes resolutely against the future." You know, because I wonder if she's sort of worried, like during that walk, I mentioned there's a vivid description of that walk. She has so much time to think. And so she's got good thoughts and bad thoughts that are both pervading, right? Because she's excited to see Rochester, but she also knows that her time with him might not last that much longer, right?
Very true. Yeah, it is a conundrum, and she really has to live for the moment and enjoy it while it lasts, because she doesn't know what's going to happen. And, you know, she attempts to kind of, I think, delay the anticipation of seeing Rochester by walking home instead of taking the carriage.
Oh, yeah.
And, you know, then she has this confrontation with Rochester that she didn't expect, because he's sitting on her walk back.
He's supposed to be gone, right?
Yeah, she didn't expect to see him. So then that causes her to like nearly lose control of her emotions, which I think also sets up that Jane is going to lose control of her emotions in the next chapter. Nice little preview there from Charlotte.
Yeah, it goes back to something I said when there was the one chapter where she was describing how all the guests in the house they're not like Rochester, and he's more for me, all this stuff. But this one, I just felt like she is swooning so bad. Like, but she's also like, she's totally in her own head.
Yes.
She's overanalyzing every action around Rochester, like she's like a nervous young girl. And but I did want to ask you the line, and I think you already mentioned it, which was, "Wherever you are is my home, my only home." As far as I know, that's the first time Jane is sort of outwardly romantic towards Rochester, right? Rochester has made comments to her.
Yeah.
But I feel like Jane has never really expressed her feelings so outwardly, even though this is kind of subtle.
Very subtle.
But it's still, it was a shock to me as I read it. I've never seen her express her feelings that bluntly before.
Yes, I feel like, Jane always keeps her emotions held back. She doesn't want to reveal too much of what she's thinking. And when you read that line, wherever you are is my home, it's kind of, it doesn't have to be romantic. It could be like she's just grateful that she has a nice place to work and a great master to work for. But reading between the lines, as I'm sure Rochester did, he's trying to get these hints about what Jane's feeling, so this helps him a little bit.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
That sets up the momentous next chapter or whatever, right? Yeah.
Yes, we're talking so much about this next chapter.
We should just cut right to it. It's almost like Charlotte wanted us to with making this chapter so short.
Right? Yeah, propel us right towards the next chapter.
Yeah, but Jane's not the only one swooning, right? Rochester is starting to.
He's very flirtatious in this chapter. I feel the way that he teases her for being gone so long and for knowing what he has been up to. Which Jane has written some letters with Mrs. Fairfax, so now that's how she knows.
Yeah, but I wonder, I joked about it on the last episode that I felt like he definitely came off as a little bit insensitive, where he was like, why are you leaving? And she'll probably be dead before you get there.
Right.
And I wonder, when she left, has that been kind of sitting with him? Like, I can't believe I left her that way. And so when she comes back, maybe he's putting it on a little thicker to kind of remind her, he's kind of making up for how insensitive he might have seemed before she left.
Yeah, also, he might be a little giddy with happiness. Probably he didn't expect to see her, so he, all of a sudden he looks up and there she is walking towards him.
She wasn't announced or whatever. She stayed for an extra month. She didn't. No carrier pigeon bringing him a letter that says I'm going to stick around for a while.
And I'm sure he's been wanting to see her, so it is like a nice surprise for him.
There you are.
Well, he's not a ghost, but every nerve I have is unstrung.
Come on. If you please. Is this Jane Eyre coming from Milcote on foot? Oh, yes, just one of your tricks. Not to send for a carriage and come clattering home like a common mortal. Oh, no. You must steal in, just as if you were a dream or shade.
Before we move on to the interesting context part of our episode, I do want to ask one last question. How would you define the term Janian?
Oh.
Because I feel like she has a personality type.
Yeah.
But yeah, I joke, there's a new adjective to use.
Yeah, because I'm trying to think the way that when Rochester says it, when Jane says, "Oh, I've been with my aunt who is dead," what does that mean? So he said, "Oh, that's a true Janie reply," because he's thinking, "Oh, you've been with your aunt in the other world. You've spent some time with her."
Is it sort of the sprite thing, the fairy?
Yeah, so the supernatural element. So
that's Janian to him.
I think, yeah.
Because he kind of runs with that bit for a while too, so yeah.
Yeah, so that does seem to fit sort of his idea of her being this otherworldly creature, I think.
Okay, but as compared to if you and I want to use Janie in moving forward, I will think of it as something that means passionate or headstrong, and true to their virtue.
Yeah, that's perfect meaning.
You're very Janian, I guess. I don't know.
You're very Janian in this moment.
All right, what is the interesting context from the chapter, Charlene?
So in this chapter, Mr. Rochester is talking about this carriage that he bought for his future Mrs. Rochester, and he says to Jane, "You must see the carriage, Jane, and tell me if you don't think it will suit Mrs. Rochester exactly, and whether she won't look like Queen Boudica leaning back against those purple cushions."
Who is Queen Boudica?
I had to look that up because I wasn't really aware of her, and she was the queen of a British tribe back in the Roman times of around AD 60 or 61, and she led a rebellion against the Romans who were invading England. The rebellion failed, but she died. They say that she died of her wounds, or she poisoned herself. Not sure what happened. But in the Victorian era, the story of this woman taking on the Roman armies just became very popular, and Queen Victoria was likened to her, and she became sort of this legendary figure for women at that time. So I think that's a nice little reference that Rochester makes. It's sort of a quirky way of Rochester maybe referring to Jane as someone who would take down armies.
Rochester? Quirky?
Or Jane. Oh, well, yes.
Yeah, get out of here. I honestly, I feel like he's just likes to show off how much he knows. It's come up many times in this book. And I mean, do you find that charming? Because I know I'm definitely guilty of that in our relationship.
Well, I don't know if Rochester is showing off that much, if this is very common knowledge at the time, But yeah, maybe it can be charming. Mm-hmm. So now we come to the last part of our episode where we talk about our favorite meaningful passages or quotes. And Mike, why don't you share yours first?
I will say that when I was reading it, the quote that I was going to pull was how people feel when they are returning home.
Oh.
But then I came around with another quote that I really liked toward the end. And it's after Jane and Rochester are reunited and they're talking outside. And Jane says to herself, quote, "I knew there would be pleasure in meeting my master again, even though broken by the fear that he was so soon to cease to be my master, and by the knowledge that I was nothing to him. But there was ever in Mr. Rochester, so at least I thought, such a wealth of the power of communicating happiness, that to taste but of the crumbs he scattered to stray and stranger birds like me was to feast genially."
Another bird reference.
And I will just say the only thing I have in my notes here is 4 words. She's got it bad. That's
yes.
To just taste but of the crumbs would be to feast genially. We joke about on this show the rivalry, the rivalry that doesn't exist between Jane Eyre, Charlotte Bronte, and Jane Austen. But there's sometimes whenever I read some of these flowing romantic quotes, I'm like, this is probably something that should be more of a Jane Austen book than a Bronte book.
No, I feel like the Jane Eyre or Charlotte Bronte books have a lot more passionate feelings in them, where Jane Austen would be like, "Oh, he's quite nice."
Oh, okay. Well, yeah.
But I also like that quote that the turn of phrase of stray and stranger birds. That's it's very poetic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I guess captures Jane in the way that she's, that Mr. Rochester brings great joy to her, particularly. And that's why they are so well matched, because she just enjoys his presence so much.
And like I said, that's the weird dichotomy of this chapter.
Yeah. She's
so excited to see him, even though she knows that it might not last much longer, but she's still going to make the most out of it. But Blanche is still there. But she's going to enjoy this walk to Thornfield and think about him. But he's getting a carriage for his future wife. Like, yeah. Let's see what happens in the next chapter, I guess. But
funnily enough, we picked the same quote.
We did pick the same quote? Okay. That's twice in 22 chapters. Okay.
Yeah. And I just wanted to mention that she says really quickly, "And by the knowledge that I was nothing to him," which, Jane just casually stating, "Oh, Rochester doesn't care about me. She's just controlling her expectations regarding his feelings for her." And it's sad, but also very understandable.
Well, yeah. Or is it sort of a reverse psychology kind of a thing? She's doing reverse psychology on herself. Or she's like, I mean nothing to him.
Well.
And then you're just hoping that's actually not the case. Yeah.
Let's see. We will see. Well, we're coming to the end of our episode, but before we wrap up, I wanted to say that on the day that we are recording this, which is March 13th, we found out that William Hurt passed away, and he was Mr. Rochester in the 1996 adaptation. And I just want to take a moment to remember him, because the 1996 adaptation was my first adaptation, so I think of him as my first Rochester, and because of that, this adaptation has always held a very near and dear place in my heart. And even though it's not my favorite anymore, there were so many moments in it that I really loved, and including how beautifully shot it was. The music is gorgeous, and William Hurt's sort of melancholy take on Rochester, it was really romantic to me at that time, and still is. And in a way that I guess sort of the female protagonist must save the male protagonist because he's so sad and heartbroken. And William Hurt just did that role justice in that sense, where you really felt for Rochester's sorrow.
Yeah, it's kind of understated, if I remember correctly. We're going to have another episode later about all the different adaptations. And spoiler, Charlotte Gainsbourg is one of my favorite, if not my favorite, Janes. But William Hurt holds his own. And like I said, it's a slightly different take. He's not over the top. What did you say? Melancholy is a good word for it. Like, I'm trying to think of when was the first time that I had seen him. I'm guessing this might have been one of the first things you've ever seen William Hurt in, right?
Yes, I'm not really. Wasn't really very familiar with him.
Yeah.
In his career.
I mean, I knew who he was when I was younger. I think one of the first movies that I ever saw him in also starred one of your favorite actors, Kevin Kline, and that was I Love You to Death.
Oh, well, I did see that movie, yes.
Yeah.
So, that was after Jane Eyre, I think.
Yeah, and if there's any listeners who are not overly familiar with his work or they only know him as Mr. Rochester, I would highly recommend his role in Body Heat is fantastic, and he is excellent in the thriller Gorky Park, where he plays a Russian, I don't know he's a detective, and Lee Marvin is like this American, and they have to solve this crime together.
Oh, that sounds interesting.
And he's very Russian. He's very quiet, very understated in that way. So, but it kind of makes me think we have to revisit the 1996 version again, like you said.
Yeah, I definitely recommend it to everyone to check it out if you haven't seen it, and I feel like we'll watch it again soon just to remember how good it is. Yeah.
Yeah, he's a great talent. He will definitely be missed.
Come with me, Miss Eyre.
Adele, continue with your work. And remember, the shadows are as important as the light.
Do you believe that?
What, sir?
That the shadows are as important as the light.
I believe none of us is perfect. I believe none of us is without some fault to hide.
You are not naturally austere any more than I am naturally vicious. I once had a heart full of tender feelings. But fortune has knocked me about. Now I'm hard and tough as an India rubber ball. Think there's any hope for me?
Hope for what, sir?
Am I being transformed from India rubber back to flesh and blood?
Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed our podcast, please subscribe and leave us a review on your preferred podcast platform. This really helps us grow and reach new listeners. If you want to talk Jane Eyre with me online, you can find me on Twitter and Instagram at AirGuide. That's EYRE.
And if you want to hear more from me, I host my own podcast called Out of Touchstone, where my good friend Chad and I discuss all the films that Disney produced for their Touchstone Pictures label. You can also find me on Twitter at Mike DeKalb.
Thank you, and farewell for the present.